right. I want to welcome everybody to our November edition of the Vanguard Virtual Series. Today's especially exciting day as we have the privilege of having Elizabeth Hudson today as our guest. Your questions and participation are so important. So if you'd like to be part of the discussion, please use the chat feature or just feel free to raise your hand on using the raise your hand icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll be able to unmute you and bring you into the conversation at the end of the presentation. Many of you already know Elizabeth and are well aware of her many accolades and association with Our State magazine. We're so proud to note that Elizabeth earned her BA in English at UNCG in 1995. And shortly following graduation, she began her publishing career at Our State, holding various positions before becoming editor-in-chief in 2009. Elizabeth's leadership has guided the magazine to unprecedented growth, with an increase in circulation by more than 40% to more than 186,000 readers. Each month, she works with top writers and photographers in the country to produce a magazine that has carried national recognition and certainly one that we all know and love. I think that most of us would agree that the greatest joy of reading Our State is turning the first pages to read Elizabeth's monthly column. We are always assured of being transported to another place in time, feeling that Elizabeth personally knows each one of us and can articulate words that capture some of our fondest memories. Her incredible gift of sharing stories is indeed the hallmark of this unparalleled magazine. Elizabeth is a very loyal alumna. Not only has Elizabeth given of her time and talent for several of our alumni programs, she also serves on the Alumni Leadership Board. Elizabeth supports our Vanguard initiatives, and you can also find Elizabeth at many of our other events, such as Alumni All Access and Homecoming. In 2019, she received the UNCG Alumni Award for Professional Achievement. Elizabeth, I can't thank you enough for your willingness to support UNCG wherever's needed, and it means so much to all of us. So we are thrilled and honored to have you with us today. We're certainly looking forward to having you all to ourselves as you share your knowledge and passion about incredible women in North Carolina. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you, Mary. Oh my gosh, that was so nice. I appreciate it. And I'm so happy to be here and spend our time together with everybody and just looking forward to the day. I wanted to start out by telling you about an experience I had a number of years ago. I went to the opening of a museum exhibit in Charlotte at the Levine Museum of the New South. The exhibit was called Purses, Platforms, and Power, and it was about a woman's place in North Carolina, specifically Charlotte, in the 1970s, which is the year I was born. In 1970, there were no women in elected office in Charlotte, no women in TV news. I'm sure you know that this story wasn't that much different all across North Carolina. The exhibit chronicled the rise of female leadership across the state, and what really stood out to me the most was the way the exhibit was set up. There were two doors in front of the entire exhibit. You got to choose which door you entered through. On one door, there were a list of words: teacher, nurse, secretary, sales clerk, textile worker. The other door, the words were doctor, minister, politician, soccer player, business executive, journalist. Well, of course, I walked to the door that says journalist, push to open it, and it's blocked. I had a profound realization in that moment. I realized that 50 years ago, in my own lifetime, that I likely would not have been allowed to have the job that I have now. This exhibit made me think about the trailblazers, the people who have come before me to struggle, to work, to lay a path, so that my door and so many others wouldn't be blocked. A few years ago, I spoke at an event in Pinehurst, and during my presentation, I kept watching this woman in the audience, this very handsome woman who just sat a bit different, taller, it seemed, than the other attendees. After my talk, she came up to introduce herself, Alice Irby, and to tell me that she too had graduated from UNCG. But when she was there in 1950, of course, it was known as Women's College. I've learned now that you can always spot someone from WC. What I've learned now is what so many of you, of course, know, that this was a time when many women didn't go to college. So the women from WC had a certain characteristic. They were defiant, determined. They understood this incredible gift to be receiving a college education. The more I talked to Alice, the more I realized how extraordinary her life was and is. Many of you may know Alice, think she may even be here today. And if you don't, let me tell you what I learned. After graduation, Alice took a job as director of admissions for the college. Shortly after that, she landed up north at Rutgers University in New Jersey, where she became the first woman vice president at a major university. I learned that the IRS audited Alice nearly every year because the Bureau couldn't believe a woman made that much money. I learned that during her travels as an executive, Alice was once refused a seat on an airplane. She held up the plane for hours, demanding a copy of the policy stating that women couldn't fly on executive flights. When she returned home, Alice and a friend drew up a letter to the airline threatening to sue for discrimination. And that airline suspended the executive flights 2 months later. I am proud to know Alice. To me, her story is an inspiration, and I was privileged to tell it in the magazine and to share her life with all of our readers. A few years later, on a story scouting trip to New Bern, I learned about a woman named Gertrude Caraway. She was born in 1896. She was a teacher in Onslow County, and one day she assigned her students to edit an issue of the local newspaper, the Herald. Some local businessmen saw the issue of the Herald that the students had worked on, and they sent a letter to Caraway inviting her to become editor of a new newspaper, the Smithfield Observer. She did that for a few years, then quit her job, went to Columbia University and took feature writing classes, and then moved back to New Bern in the 1920s and wrote for the New Bernian, which was the newspaper at the time. In our story on Gertrude Caraway, we wrote this: up and down Broad Street, the people of the town heard Caraway write. She kept her typewriter in a room on the first floor, and at night, she opened her window to let the breeze in. She smelled the river as she sat, pounding out her stories as hard and as fast as she could. Next door, her neighbors slept with pillows over their heads. Caraway began to get a reputation. She caught the attention of the biggest names in the country: the New York Times, Associated Press, Christian Science Monitor. She made carbon copies of her stories and sold them to 5 different newspapers at a time. Her subjects were broad. She wrote about Thomas Wolfe, the first printing business in New Bern, the state flag. She signed her stories G.S. Caraway. For years, people thought she was a man. Eventually, her identity was found out. Because of her stories, she was appointed publicity chairman for the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution. It wasn't long before she became president of the entire organization. Gertrude was on a first-name basis with every first lady from Eleanor Roosevelt to Barbara Bush, and she helped create North Carolina's historical marker program. If you've driven anywhere in North Carolina, you've seen one of those markers placed on the side of the road telling the story about who we are. And if you've been to New Bern and visited Tryon Palace, you've got Gertrude Caraway to thank for that too. She's the one who led the efforts for the reconstruction of this landmark. And when it opened in 1959, she's the one who showed up every week for 52 weeks to teach visitors about the history, the furniture, the textiles, every little detail about that house. Her story is incredible. I'm enriched to know it. And it was an honor to tell it in the magazine and share her life with all of our readers. Now, not all of these women who have inspired me and our pages become president of something. A few years ago, I got a letter from a woman in Statesville, someone named Sally Winey. It may be the strangest letter I've received in my 25 years at our state. And so today I want you to hear it. Sally wrote to me, "Dear Elizabeth, my name is Sally Winey, and I have been caring for old stuffed animals for 30 years. I have repaired over 20,000 stuffed animals, and I hear hundreds of amazing stories about how much they mean to their family. I've opened a studio to make a location for people to come to this service. Many cannot leave their animals overnight, so they come to my studio and stay while I fix or clean them. I have a couple coming from Pennsylvania tomorrow to have their panda fixed and cleaned, and he will return home by Sunday night. I have a 9-foot bear right now that was shipped to me. He needs stitching. I will happily forward you a picture if you like. He is amazing." I thought about this letter for days after I got it. It was just so bizarre. So I got in touch with Sally, and she read more letters to me, letters that she gets written from the stuffed animal's perspective. I want to share another one with you. "Dear Miss Sally, hello, my name is Teddy. My owner's name is Mommy, or Miss Sarah Erdman. She is 15 years old and going to summer camp soon. I always go to camp with her to keep her calm. Teddy has no eyes. Please do repair vision. I am loved without eyes. Please return as soon as possible and write Teddy on the box outside. Thank you, Teddy." And in parentheses, Sarah. "P.S. As you can see, my bubby, Grandma, has been stitching me up for a long time. We both love her. Bubby does not know how to sew." As it turns out, Sally's grandmother was a seamstress and alterations employee for Macy's department store. As a child, Sally sat beneath her grandmother's 1897 sewing machine and played with scraps of fabric. One day, her grandmother gave her a hand-cranked machine clamped to that same sewing table so that Sally could sew right alongside her grandmother. Today in that studio, Sally is repairing stuffed animals. Some are over 100 years old with that same 1897 sewing machine that belonged to her grandmother. Here's one more letter. "Dear Sally, I have enclosed Stripey. Stripey is my daughter's most beloved toy since she was 2. Ava is now 7 years old. During the past 5 weeks, we have managed to avert many disasters involving Stripey. A few weeks ago, we were not so lucky, and our new puppy Pearl got a hold of Stripey and could not resist chewing off a few body parts. As you can imagine, it was devastating for all of us. Since the accident, we have had many conversations about forgiving Pearl for mistaking Stripey for a dog toy and about forgiving Mommy for leaving the gate open and allowing Pearl to access Stripey when she was vulnerable. Mostly, we discussed that while Stripey's injuries will make her look different, we will love her just the same." Now, this story is so simple. A woman sews bears. But After the Osaka earthquake in 1993, she made bears free of charge for Japanese dignitaries to sell, raising $60,000 for earthquake victims. She makes Sir Cough-a-Lot bears, also completely free of charge for sick children. And she provides bears that she makes for children at the Dove House, an advocacy center for abused children in Iredell County. One woman with a sewing machine. And what an impact she's made. Sally's story to me was one of restoration. And I often think there are times when any one of us would be grateful to find ourselves in Sally's caring hands. And finally, there are the women who I know better than anyone else in my life, my mother, my grandmother. If you read my columns in the magazine, as Mary said, I've written 165 of them, I think, since I've been editor-in-chief. Then you know that I write a lot about family. My grandmother wasn't president of anything. She didn't even go to college. But legacy lies in a lot of places. And I'd like to share my grandmother's story too, from a column I wrote, and I hope it's a reminder that everything we do, no matter how big or how small, lives on in some way. This is called The Language of Flowers. Orchids were everywhere at the fresh market the other day, so that's what I got for my side table. And after a bitter winter, the tulips looked fresh and bright, so I got a bunch of those too and made a pretty arrangement in a water glass for my kitchen table. And I couldn't leave the store without those stems of stargazer lilies and a cluster of creamy Lenten roses that have now found a place on the nightstand beside my bed. I've taken to filling my house with fresh flowers every week, and even I am surprised at how transformative these blooms are, how they effortlessly change the personality of a space. Until recently, I never spoke the language of flowers, or rather, flowers never spoke to me, not the way they have to so many people I know, and certainly not the way they spoke to my grandmother. She had a perennial garden in her backyard, perennials because she didn't have much money to replant flowers every year. And I can see her standing out there in her garden now, the sleeves of her white cotton blouse rolled to the elbows, a cigarette held between two fingers, the sun catching the tiny rhinestones in the upsweep of her cat eyeglasses. She was the epitome of Southern grace in that garden, and I think the flowers she grew stood upright just for her. She weeded and watered and tended and dug in the dirt, and in the spring she got her reward when the garden exploded in abundance, more color and scent than any yard could possibly contain, and off she went with the shears on Saturday mornings, carting armfuls of cuttings into the house and spreading the flowers across the kitchen table. She set to stripping leaves and snipping stems on the diagonal, and I, transfixed by television cartoons and my comic books, ignored whatever she was doing. I wish I had paid more attention, because then I would have noticed how she arranged the tall branches of brilliant yellow forsythia in cut crystal trumpet vases, fanning the woody stalks into a spray that looked like rays of sunshine. I would have watched how she tucked blueberry-hued hyacinths, no longer than her hand, into a squat knobby milk glass. I would have seen how she trained her American Beauty roses to climb the trellis behind the porch swing. I would have helped her water the hydrangeas and bury pennies in the dirt to turn them blue, because blue was the prettiest color against the white clapboard of her house. I would have carried the tin can with her day-old Maxwell House coffee grounds to the edge of the garden and sprinkled the contents at the base of the camellia bush. I would have laughed more when she plucked yellow buttercups and waved them under my chin until I admitted to liking butter. I like it, Grandma, I do. And I would let her tickle me until I dissolved into a fit of giggles, and I would have put my hand on her back to steady her when she stretched to reach the high branches from the magnolia tree, and I would have filled the ceramic dishes with water for floating those magnolia blooms, one in every room. I would have breathed in deeper that fragrance like the sweetest syrup and held it inside for as long as possible. And I would have gone out to the garden for my grandmother when she was no longer able to, and picked a bouquet of her favorites, irises, the violet and blue and magenta and yellow ones, the ones named for Iris in Greek mythology, the goddess of the rainbow, the link between sea and sky, the one who carries all the messages between heaven and earth. And that was my grandmother. Thank you for letting me share a few stories that have made such an impact in my life, people that I've been lucky enough to meet, people that I've met in the pages, and just people who have really inspired me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I just always feel like I have to take it in before we move to that next space. Thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
We're just so honored to have with us one of the women that you highlighted today. As you mentioned, Alice Irby is here, and Alice, as our conversation and questions evolve, we'll certainly call on you to share some of your highlights. Before we start with questions, I have a surprise for our audience and Elizabeth. We have several of Elizabeth's books, and we'll have a giveaway for our audience members. We'll be randomly selecting some names from our attendee list, and the selected names will be called at the end of the presentation. And Elizabeth, I hope you'll add an extra bonus by signing each copy.
I would be honored. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying yes. And so at the end of the program, I'll read the names of our winners, and we'll mail the books to you after Elizabeth has had the opportunity to sign them. So without further ado, we will ask that you put your questions in the chat. And we did have a couple of questions that were sent in ahead of time, Elizabeth, while people have that opportunity. And also, Alice, I think a great way to start this off is to start with you after Elizabeth's beautiful presentation. So Alice, and we'll put you on camera here if you're okay with that. Alice, are you there? Can we unmute? There we go. Alice, we'll get your picture up here in just a second.
Hello, Alice.
Elizabeth, thank you so much.
Alice, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Need just a little more volume if you can.
Okay, I just have to speak up, I guess.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I moved the computer a little closer. But now you've disappeared. The host would like to promote you to be a panelist. I need to join as a panelist. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you see that? Are you with us? So Alice, I think we muted again. So while we're trying to figure that out, we'll go ahead and move forward to a couple of our questions. Elizabeth, one of the things that the questions that was sent ahead of time was really asking about your schedule on the magazine and how do you handle always working ahead, so far ahead? Oh, there's Alice.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
We'll hold that question, Elizabeth.
Okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to say thank you, Elizabeth. I'm flattered and I'm humbled. And I'm also very appreciative of you and of people in my life. I can't really take a lot of credit. You mentioned the word legacy. I have benefited from the legacy that I inherited from some very special people. My mother, who taught me that human worth is not a matter of race or size of your pocketbook. My minister, who kept saying to me, Alice, you're responsible to use whatever talent you have. My music teacher, who is also a women's college graduate, like my mother, who used to push me to excel, but then when I did, would remind me that no matter how good I was, there was always somebody better. And then the people at women's college, dedicated to service, and they served me. Warren Ashby's particularly, whom you were too young to know. But I remember his saying one day in the soda shop, which is now the faculty place, Alice, you will have opportunities to do something different, seize them. So those things went with me all during my life. And now I want to turn the tables and tell you how you influenced me. In the summer of 2021, I picked up my copy of Our State magazine, and there on the cover was a picture of the Roanoke River. I couldn't believe it. Elizabeth hadn't told me what she was doing. I just found the article as fast as I could. It was stunning. It was absolutely stunning. I couldn't believe it. The pictures, especially of the rocks in the rapids, I had never seen before. She was able to get an aerial view. And the article written by Bland Simpson was the most beautiful thing I've ever read about that river. I grew up on that river right where that picture was. Wow. So I have been, and she introduced me to Bland. We had a short correspondence, and I have since read his book, Into the Sound, I think it is. He also has a chapter in there about the Roanoke Valley. But going forward, my daughter and I, as a result of that article, and she did 3 about Halifax County. She's the best cheerleader in the whole state, and her megaphone is big. So we're grateful for that. We appreciate what you've done for our area. But as a result of that article, Elizabeth, my daughter and I decided to take a trip down the trail of the river. I had never done that. I'd never followed the river down to Plymouth. So we spent several days, starting in Weldon, not too far from the distillery that you featured. Incidentally, that distillery last year had 50,000 people come through for its tastings and tours. So you started something. Wow. They're really prospered. Anyway, Andrea and I went down through Williamston and to Plymouth. The river's very different down there. You know, it's not rocky, it's not turbulent the way it is. You know, the old name for the Roanoke River was Meritauk, and that was the Indians' name, meaning the river of death, because it was so turbulent up near where we live. Anyway, from Plymouth, we went over to Edenton, and we were touring Edenton, and we were in one of the tourist spots down on the water, Peggy Barker House, I think it was, and we bumped into this young man, J.W. Sharon. He overheard a conversation of ours. J.W. said, well, I grew up in Roanoke Rapids, and I love the Roanoke River. And so we talked a little bit. I got his phone number. About a year ago, when we started a revitalization effort in Weldon, again, largely because of what you got started, JW came to our group. And he has a fishing shack on the river with a boat. This past Sunday, JW took Andrea and me and several other people out on that boat down the Roanoke River to Halifax. It's the first time I've been on that river in over 70 years. And we talked about your article, and we talked about Occoneechee Neck, because one of our members grew up on the long farm right there at Occoneechee Neck. So you too, Elizabeth, have an impact far beyond what you can imagine. And I'm very appreciative for you, for me, but also for our state.
Thank you so much, Alice. I love that story so much. And I'm so glad the magazine was able to kind of rekindle your love for place, which I know you've never left. And it's just amazing you remain as mesmerizing to me as when I first met you.
Well, you brought it back, and you brought me back. And And I thank you for what you've done for Halifax. You had a feature about Patterson. And one of the little flea markets you featured is now gone upscale, and it's called Red Wagon.
Oh, wow.
And you did something else this summer. You had an article, I have it right here, in the July issue on cotton.
Right.
And this young man named Julius Tillery
Yes.
that farms part of his father's land to bring back cotton. But the interesting thing is that Julius lives in Weldon with his mother, and I know his mother, and she is a newly elected town councilwoman.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
I love it.
We point to this article again for Weldon.
We think it's a big, wide state, and then we hear stories that make us realize how connected we all are.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Well, you do a lot of that. You make the connections. So thank you.
Thank you.
We have two of the greatest story sharers right here with Elizabeth and Alice. How fortunate for us today. Catherine Shoemaker, I see you have your hand raised, and Marcia, then we'll get to your question in the chat. So Katie, I'm gonna go ahead and allow you, I have unmuted you. So do you want to ask your question for Elizabeth?
I think she's still muted.
I think you're right.
Mhm.
Catherine, we'll come back to you. And so we will go to Marcia Driscoll, and her question is, Elizabeth, do you have any women faculty members who were especially meaningful to you during your time at UNCG?
You know, that's a really great question. And I'd have to kind of go back and really think, but, you know, I was in the English department, and interestingly, most of my professors were men. And, you know, Michael Parker, obviously, and Jim Clark, and, you know, I just had such an extraordinary experience there. But I do recall taking several classes with Lee Zacharias, who was of course, in the English department, and I think she still is. She taught a class called the Contemporary Novel. And when I first was a student, kind of not sure what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be, I just knew I liked to read. And, you know, I was in her class where she introduced me to just, you know, people like Bobby Ann Mason and these writers who had a Southern voice that sounded a lot like mine, and how influential, and of course, Lee Zacharias does as well, and how influential that was and became. So I'm sure there were more, you know, it's been so long ago. So I'd really have to go back and think and kind of recall, but that Lee certainly stands out as notable to me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It looks like Catherine is ready to ask her questions. Jill, is she queued and ready to go?
She's still muted.
I have asked Catherine to unmute, but I believe she has to do that on her end.
Right.
Catherine, are you able to unmute and we can hear your question?
Maybe she could type it into the chat.
Yeah, or that's a great suggestion, Elizabeth, or type into the chat if that's easier for you. We'll give it just a second. So Elizabeth, if you don't mind, we'll jump back to that earlier question, and it was really more about production and just how do you handle that rigorous schedule of always working ahead, and how far ahead do you work is the question.
Right. I mean, you know, the production schedule on a magazine is really fascinating. We work about a year in advance. Alice, when you saw that Roanoke River issue, that photograph had been taken, that was a March issue, so it had been taken the previous March because we capture seasonal photography. So we had a drone that we shot from and wanted to look when it comes out into the book like it's in the season. So right now it's fall, we're going into winter. We are working on and preparing for our November 2023 issues. So we are well in advance. And I'm happy to say too, next year, kicks off our 90th anniversary. The magazine was started in 1933. So it'll be our 90th anniversary. We're very excited about that. And we're working on a lot of things to celebrate that. But, you know, we've got Thanksgiving coming up. I have several features next year that'll be Thanksgiving oriented. So we have to photograph those in season now, so that when we're ready to ship a magazine to the printer, which usually ships about 3 months before you see it in print, everything will be ready to go. So, but we plan some stories even 2 years in advance. We're working ahead. I'm putting together some issues for 2024. So it's just a balance that, you know, I've been there for so long and have been doing it for so long that, you know, when it's Christmas for everybody else, in my head, it's February and March and April. And, you know, so it does mess with your mind with the seasons a little bit, but I've kind of gotten used to that. It's really exciting though. You know, I travel a lot, and in fact, again, kind of to Alice, I spent several days in Roanoke Rapids and all around Halifax County, and just really fell in love with that area. And I take notes. I have, you know, I write everything down. I'm a pen and paper kind of girl, and so I write everything down in these notebooks that I keep, and then I get back to the office, and my head just, you know, I kind of just empty everything I've learned to the editorial staff. I have a staff of 14 incredible editors. They're just so talented and amazing. And we all work together to figure out, you know, when stories might work, in what issue, what season, whether they fit a theme. As you know, we tend to theme most of our issues because the magazine is so large. It's in excess of 200 pages every month. And so it's helpful, especially for a reader, to have a cohesive thread that runs through the issue. And so we theme most of our issues. Got some good themes that we're working on. Currently, we are in the middle of production on our January issue, which will ship to the printer next week. But of course, we were in the process of writing those stories and photographing those stories a year ago. So because it's got a winter theme. And so, you know, if we were doing it right now, there's no snow on the ground.
Snow's getting harder and harder to find.
Yeah, I know.
I don't even know what day it is. I don't know how you do that.
I want to inject one more thing. I'm not the only fan of Elizabeth. She has quite a reputation in Halifax County. Laurie Medlin talks about you all the time.
Love Lori.
Addison Wilson, Glenn
Yeah.
Dickens. I mean, they celebrate you in Halifax,
Oh,
as we do in
Phyllis.
Weldon. So I didn't know that she had come up there, but she did go up there and spend several days and got to know that place. And we were so grateful. But I have something else to say while people are waiting to get on. She talked about my determination. She was a determined young lady too. She didn't start off at UNCG. She started, can I tell this?
Sure.
She started off, was it Appalachian?
It was.
Appalachian. She decided this place is not for me. She
for me.
packed up her car and she went home.
She dropped out is what she did.
No, I didn't say that. You talk about grit and gumption. This young lady has it, because then she decided, well, I might as well try UNCG to see what it is. So she did, and look what she's done since then. She deserves every award she's received. I told her that I remembered Our State magazine when I was a young woman in North Carolina, and it was a little tabloid, black and white. And I came back, and here was this first-rate, beautiful magazine. And it's all because of Elizabeth.
Well, it's not all because of me. There are lots and lots of people involved in it, but we are so proud of it. And you know, when I first got the job there, the magazine was about 45 pages, and it was still saddle stitched. It was just a real thin publication. I think it didn't even turn to full color until 1996. It was still, you know, about half black and white up until that. So it's been really satisfying and gratifying to kind of be able to see its evolution and growth.
Yeah, but that's because it was white and black, because she started out as the receptionist. And
You know a lot about me. That's right.
That's when it changed.
Wonderful. Jill, are we able to get Catherine ready to ask her question? There,
We are in the same boat with Catherine. Catherine has permission to unmute.
okay.
Asked her to unmute, and Catherine, if you would rather put your question in the chat, that also works.
Okay, we'll give a few seconds. Elizabeth, another question that was sent in early is about your the conference that you do in January. And can you talk a little bit about how that got started? And it is so popular. I understand it is already sold out. So can you tell us a little bit about this,
I can.
why you do that and the theory behind that?
Absolutely. We have an event every year. It's the first weekend in January called the Best of Our State. And it is truly an extravaganza for 3 days when the magazine comes to life with incredible speakers, musicians, artists. I mean, it really is something. We have it at the Pinehurst Resort, the Carolina Inn, Pinehurst Resort every year. That I will tell you though, how it came about. We didn't have it for 2 years because of COVID. And this is our first year back after having canceled it for 2 years. And we are so excited. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why it was sold out. But our marketing director, her name's Amy, had the brainstorm to have this live event where readers could meet each other, and we would have just amazing people present. And we started out at the Grove Park Inn in Asheville. The first year we did it, we're 25 years, given 2 years of the pandemic, but would be our 25th year. We started out at the Grove Park Inn in Asheville in January. They really were not interested in having us there at all. They said, if you think you want to have an event here, you can do it the first weekend in January when, nobody's here and it's fine and it's cold and it's snowing, and good luck to you. They really didn't quite know what to make of us, I think. And so we came on in and set up shop and had an event. And by I think year 2, we sold out the entire hotel for our event, just filled it out. It's like 800 rooms. I mean, it's just a lot of people. And it was a wonderful event at Grove Park for many, many years. And we wanted to kind of, spread the love a little bit around the state. So we moved it to Pinehurst. And of course, it's grown into really our signature flagship event of the year. We have lots of events over the course of the year, but that is the big one. And we always run an ad for it in the magazine in the months leading up to it. So, when you see that, you certainly would want to register as soon as you can, usually in the summer, to secure a spot. But it's so much fun, and we're just excited to all be back in person again this year. We've also,
it looks spectacular. The lineup looks spectacular.
Yeah. Speaking of that, a lot of people sometimes ask me about the Our State TV show. If anybody's seen that, it's run on UNCG, which is now called PBSNC. We ran a TV show that was segments from the magazine. Again, stories from the magazine that would be translated into a television program. The program was so successful for PBSNC. We won 17 Emmys for the Our State TV show. It was just a wonderful show. We loved working on it. And then we took a hiatus for several years, but we have just now debuted that show back again as really just sort of a look back at some of the Best of Our State's older episodes that are still incredibly timely. They hold up. I'm on the show now. I do the introduction to introduce each of the segments. And we just started it back up a couple weeks ago. It airs on Thursday nights at 8:00 on PBSNC. So this week on Thursday at 8:00, hopefully you can catch the show. It's really good. And we're just proud to see that back on PBS again.
You're one busy lady.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you being with us today. Well, we have one more question that came in through the chat from Anne, and she's wanting to know, how do you get motivated to write so much and so often? She said you mentioned how many stories you've done for the magazine. So where does this come from?
That is a great question. And, my greatest fear, the thing that keeps me up at night, is that I just won't have anything to say anymore, that'll be it, that I will have realized I've written all that I can write. And so far, thankfully, that hasn't happened yet. But, I had on the one hand, for so long in my life, I thought I had just such a boring life. You know, I'm an only child. I grew up in Ashboro, but that's not true at all. There were so many riches surrounding me. You know, I talk so much about the time I spent with my grandmother. She died when I was 23 years old, but I was able to spend just about every weekend with her throughout the year and you know, all day in the summers. And my parents were just, to me, I see it now. I didn't see it in my, you know, teens and 20s, that my parents were interesting people. My mom had a small business, a craft store. My dad was a photographer who had a studio in High Point, and then also had a sandwich shop. He opened a little restaurant in Ashboro. And, you know, things that I just didn't notice and maybe took for granted then, that I'm able to go back in memory and just recall how we lived, you know, and what life was like. When I travel around the state, you know, I've been to all 100 counties many, many, many times. And whenever I get into a place, I'll see something, just like the littlest thing, that reminds me of something from my own life. And I'll just kind of start, you know, taking notes and writing it down. It takes me, believe it or not, about a whole month to write one of my columns. They're not that long. They're only, you know, 400 or 500 words, but I certainly credit my education from UNCG for this. It was such a great, the English department there is extraordinary. And, you know, I remember having a class with Fred Chappell, who of course is a poet laureate, was a poet laureate. And as a poet, he had such an emphasis on every word matters. And I think about that when I write. My staff knows that, you know, I have a penchant for the last word. I think I'd heard that, you know, the last word could really be a summation of your entire essay if you're writing. And so I usually will start writing with one last word. I know my last word before I know any of the body of the rest of the essay. And then once I have that last word, I can kind of write toward that. So to me, in some ways, I guess I think I'm, you know, writing poetry. It's probably a secret dream of mine to be doing that. But
Well, you are a beautiful writer. And so I'll save my last word. I always feel like this is always a little bit of an awkward transition, because it's been such a wonderful conversation about women and passion and love and admiration. But I'm going to tell everybody who's won random pick, and then I'll come back to that last word and thank you. So we will mail these books to you. Give us a little bit of time, because we're going to take them over and have Elizabeth sign them. But Agnes Price, Barbara Sanders, Joan Greason, Marcia Driscoll, Sadie Doxey, Sue Pigg, Elaine Jenkins, Glenda Jones, and Ann Tate. And I can see you all behind the scenes doing this and being so excited. And so we will get those mailed to you just as soon as possible. Elizabeth, our gratitude is enormous, and what a treat. And as I said earlier, to have you all to ourselves today, I think it's just such a privilege. We read your words through the magazine, but to have you here with us and through UNCG, it just means so much to all of us. And I know that our audience today extends that same gratitude to you. Thank you.